Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm really happy to have everyone. If you like what we're doing, go ahead and like and subscribe. Follow me on social media and everything like that. I usually do one with other people, but I kind of thought this would be a good one just to kind of throw kind of my opinions out there, and then kind of see, kind of where I feel, how I think about some of these issues. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So with Zohran Mamdani, obviously big in the news with everything that's going on. Won the Democratic primary in the mayoral race. So there's been a lot of talk about it. A lot of kind of work going on in the Democratic Party and kind of pushing him out. A lot of kind of anti-establishment people are obviously very big on him and are really trying to push that. He's been on a lot of social media. He's also been on a lot of traditional media. So I just figured I'd kind of go in and just kind of talk about kind of my views and opinions on him and his race and just kind of where all that stands. So first and foremost, anytime someone wins a race as an underdog, regardless of their position, that's something you should always be kind of happy about. Anti-incumbency is a great thing. And going against people who have been in positions of power for a while and really kind of holding those who are in power in check and not having such a kind of they deserve to be there and they've got their own little fiefdom. So great that he did that. I think he really tackled a lot of good um, new media. He used a lot of that. Really was on social media, was on podcasts, was in traditional media, was kind of all over the place with where he was and where his views were. I think he did a pretty good job of kind of getting his views on affordability, and kind of what he wants to bring to the table for the New York mayor race. He really did a good job of kind of pushing that and talking about that. So I think he did pretty well in kind of getting that out there. A lot of people have tried to get him off topic, and with the whole viral video on Israel, with people that I've talked to, it's kind of like that doesn't even really matter. It's not really something that they should even have brought up. Just kind of shows that they, tried to pinpoint him into a corner and really tried to, kind of put his back up against the wall. And in that debate, you can even see kind of Como or not Como, Cuomo going after him and really trying to push the issue. But I think he gave that a good answer on that, especially with a New York race. And I know there's a huge Jewish population in New York. I've got a lot of ties to New York City. I've got a lot of cousins who live there, and in that city, families from right outside of New York, both in New Jersey as well as on the island. So definitely, kind of this is something that's kind of been a little close to me on. Not necessarily something I've been following a lot, but just kind of the effects of that is something that I definitely hear about on a good amount. So just a few things I kind of want to pour some water kind of on this whole debate, really kind of bring it back down to earth, because even though he won the primary, he isn't in office yet. So definitely want to kind of throw some of that stuff out there. So first off, and kind of the big one that I can see is he is a socialist. So that's not necessarily an issue that I see as what would deter me, but that word does kind of push a lot of people into different corners, depending on how you use it effectively, or if you can use it effectively, that's going to potentially persuade some voters into other candidates, especially since he is in the general election. They're going to be probably be hitting that a lot. It is in New York City, so they may not be completely against it, but you never know if someone can find a policy that you stand a certain way on and they just hammer that home. That's something that you could end up losing support on. Now, general elections, I think, you've got Mary Adams running as an independent. I think there's going to be a Republican candidate. So, you've got some of that kind of stuff on there, and maybe they can attack them from both sides. But, it's just something to kind of be not necessarily concerned about, but something to kind of keep in mind. One thing that people need to remember is although New York City is a very blue area, it is also obviously very business friendly, and they definitely kind of skew some of their viewpoints from that, especially with more of those upper middle class voters. That might be something that if someone has a good policy could push them into another direction. The other one is, and we've already kind of seen this, and it kind of goes back to my first point is, so we've already seen business leaders kind of pushing more towards going towards Eric Adams, and trying to support him. They worry about a socialist being in charge and everything like that. So I think that's definitely something that Zoran needs to kind of think about, and needs to kind of keep in mind. Cuomo did put a ton of money from donors and everything like that into his race. What kind of concerns me for um, Zoran is that, you know, and I'll talk about this on one of my other points, is that, a better candidate and someone who kind of knows how to use new media a little bit better, could really kind of fight Zoran, on the ground that he's kind of built up the win in the primary. An example with Eric Adams, he was on the Flagrant podcast. I know he's kind of been on some other ones. I don't think he's kind of being hit on as much because Trump and all them have kind of pushed back on attacking him. So he's kind of got a little bit of room to play. And so, he's not being in the news as much. So obviously with Adams being, kind of a corrupt politician, but they all are corrupt in New York, that kind of stuff maybe just isn't going to get as much play time. And so that kind of will defeat kind of the attacks that Zoran would want to have on the kind of on Adams and being corrupt and not running the city well, et cetera. So just something to keep in mind. And with businesses being willing to fund maybe Adams, he's very transactional as we saw with Trump. So maybe he can kind of push some stuff to, kind of get things going into the right direction for business community. The other one was so we know, and this kind of goes outside of New York City. So I believe uh, not Slotkin, Elise Stefanik, she was going to go up as UN secretary. She had to get kicked back down to House of Representatives. She's now talking about making a run for New York mayor. So I think that's probably one thing that not a lot of people have talked about. So in New York, as people know, MTA and some of these other things are kind of this quasi governmental body, and it's kind of not necessarily in the hands of the mayor. He definitely has some influence there, but it is kind of like a statewide thing that he has to handle. So with Hochul kind of already saying like, hey, she's not going to back some of these policies that he's pushing. She's the governor, so technically she trumps him in that. So it's something that his big challenge is how is he going to work with a fellow Democrat, but ideologically completely different, maybe Democrat. So, especially with Hochul kind of having some ties to Cuomo, Cuomo may not necessarily kind of, you don't really know how he's going to kind of play that. But if there's already some kind of fighting there, I think also with Kathy Hochul, running, I think she's up in 2026, and with Elise Stefanik, obviously going to be a Trump candidate running against her, it's going to kind of make it interesting because she's going to run kind of and push Hochul to go to the right, which is going to force conflict between Zoran and Kathy Hochul. And so she's already not super supportive. So she's feeling like, hey, especially from northern New Yorkers, that hey, they're not maybe super supportive of what's going down downstate. Then she might have to kind of go more conservative, which means she's going to fight Zoran, which means that there's going to be conflict and that there's going to be kind of it's not going to make his policy seem palatable, especially if she's like, we're not doing that, we're not doing that, we're not doing that, we're not doing that. And she's probably not going to put up any alternatives. So it's really just going to kind of make it like, hey, he's going to get in, he's going to do some small stuff. But it kind of goes to my next point is that running as a progressive, it's really tough. You got these kind of bigger city ones. I think in Chicago, the more progressive candidate what didn't do so well there. I think Boston, I've heard, they've kind of have done well there. But all in all, it really just kind of makes it hard for these very left populist groups to or left progressive populist groups being able to kind of do what they want to do, especially on the local level. I think, a lot of the policies you think about, like with Bernie and universal health care and with, some of these transportation policies and all these other kind of things, it really makes it tough to actually say, okay, now we're going to do it and have to work with your city council members as well. I think New York's got a ton of them. And then working with the state, since you've got that piece there, it's really going to kind of make the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, kind of wing of the Democratic Party able to do anything. And so I think he's obviously going to be able to do some stuff on the local level, but with what he is able to enforce and what he is able to get done, it's going to be kind of on the lower end. And so I think one of the things he needs to do is he really needs to do well at managing expectations. So, um, and I think that's the hardest part with those who are on more the Democratic Socialist wing of American politics is that, okay, how do you sit here and talk about all these things that you're going to be able to do and how you're going to use government and then get everybody kind of in line with the city council, with state representatives, with national government, get everybody in line on your point so that you can, affect change. And when you have someone who isn't really able to do that, you kind of are underselling a lot of what you can do. So an example of, I think, and this isn't 100% example from ideological, but it is kind of an example that I could see kind of him running into is where he could kind of have this Obama effect where you come in and you say, hey, here's all the things I'm going to do. Here's what I want, to enact. And then, a stiff resistance from inside your party and outside your party will really kind of slow roll a lot of what you want to do. And Obama was able to come out intact, but the progressive movement kind of, withered a little bit. And when you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of these other well-known conservatives already saying, well, look at the hellhole that's up there. It's easy for them to say, hey, he's not able to get anything done, blah, 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 blah. And then you would then see the swing back to the right. So my advice to Zoran is try to garner some of that support now. I think he's gonna win, just because I think Mayor Adams, it's not the most likable candidate, and I think people are willing to have some change. And I think Zoran's a good enough candidate to kind of push some of that back. Some of the opposition that he's going to get and be able to manage that. I think sounds like he's a good political animal on that regard. But I think his biggest issue, like I said, is going to be affecting that change. So for him, I would tell him, okay, hey, look, do what you need to do, find the common ground. If groceries are the big thing for you, great. If it's housing, great. Like you need to get everybody on board on that. That way you can actually do stuff day one and find a way to um, work with Hochul. I think that this is where not necessarily Schumer and Jeffries are going to come involved, but I think this is where, kind of the state party needs to get involved. They need to sit here and say, look, we need Hochul to win, or or there's not going to look good on us. And then we need Zoran to hopefully win, because he's going to be able to do more of what we want to do instead of Mayor Adams. So how do we mend these two groups and how do we get everybody still on the same page that people are going to vote for Zoran? He's going to be able to get things done, and then we can turn around and get Hochul reelected. One thing I will say is, in recent memory, I mean, I think maybe not super recent, but I think back in the 80s, New York had Republican not governors, but senators. I think actually they may have had one in the 90s as a governor. So it's not super crazy that, voters are going to go back towards a Republican candidate. Like I said, Hochul's not doing very great. Elise Stefanik is going to have Trump backing her, obviously. So you've got Trump being at his home state. He obviously did well with the rally in Manhattan, as well with this being his place. Working, had a huge swing in the general election. So I think depending on how things go, there could be a chance that Hochul loses. Hochul still kind of got some of that baggage from Cuomo. So you just kind of need to keep that in mind as we move forward. She definitely kind of had some of the coattails from COVID and all these other kind of things that she's still going to have on her record. So definitely needs to, find a way to work with Zoran so that they can have a united front, and can be like, hey, like maybe we're not going to sit here and do we're maybe not raise property taxes, but maybe we're not going to raise property taxes, and we're going to try to find a way to more effectively get housing done without having to raise, taxes and fund, all these other kind of things. So if they can find a way to do that and get some alignment, I think they could really do well. And that's the story of New York. Ever since New York's been a huge city, it's always been the battle between the governor and the mayor. And so this is really where state politics needs to unite everybody and then needs to say, hey, here's how we go about this. Let's win stuff upstate. That's where we need to be focused on, not downstate and inter-party feuds. So the other thing with just kind of pouring cold water on him is you see a lot of these progressives, and like I said, I kind of count myself as that, like a conservative progressive, obviously, or a progressive conservative. I think this strategy will work in more blue states. I don't know if that's going to work. I'm in South Carolina now. I don't know if that's really going to work in South Carolina. Um, so I think the strategy, the tactics of how he was able to get things done, I think did very well. And something I would definitely want to emulate when I run for office. But in terms of getting the strategy of, okay, we're going to, have these viewpoints on, socialism as well as with free community lunches and all these other kind of things, grocery stores, dealing with the free buses, all this other kind of stuff. I can see some conservatives and some more moderates kind of being like, well, I don't know how that's actually going to work, especially if you don't have a record and isn't able to affect this change like we're hopefully seeing. So just something to think about. Like I said, here in Tennessee, South Carolina, I don't think you're going to see that. Georgia, you might see a little bit of that in Atlanta. You might, but he actually didn't do very well with black voters, so you might not see that in Atlanta. So it's just one of those things where it's like I think in a very blue area of the state, you're going to see something like that, um, but not in some other parts of the state, which is fine. I think that's one of the beauties of the Democratic Party compared to Republican Party is that I do think the Democratic Party really is the biggest tent right now. And so having people all the way from DSA to conservative Democrats like myself, you really do kind of have everything in between. You see the Republicans getting a little bit of that, but I think right now, like this is the party that can do that. Um, so I think, maybe someone like that running in, like you said, like maybe not Nashville, but running in Chicago and then seeing different kinds of candidates win in the more rural and downstate in Illinois, you can really kind of have a huge party that can work with each other. So for example, Zohran, yeah, maybe I'm not super a big fan of some of his free grocery stores and stuff like that, but maybe he's got a good idea on housing. So that's a good place where some of the more abundance people and some of the conservatives and moderates can work with the DSA and left progressives and progressive populists and stuff like that, and really kind of work together on how they're going to handle that. You see a little bit of that in California. That's another great example where maybe in LA and San Francisco you can have someone like Zoran, but then over in further out in the state you'll get more conservative. Last thing is that Cuomo was a bad candidate. I think that's something that a lot of people, they keep saying, oh, Zoran did great. And it's like, yeah, but Cuomo didn't go on podcasts. He didn't do any social media. He just was a very old establishment Democrat, and not a lot really kind of came out of what was happening. So just something to keep in mind. Like I said, he wasn't a great candidate, and I think there's a lot that he can still do. He could have done better, but once again, Zoran was able to beat him. But I think Cuomo, could have really done a lot better. If it was a different candidate, maybe it could have been more contentious. Zoran won by 12. So, maybe with an actual candidate, maybe you see something that's 50-50. And then if it's something like that, I'd probably give it to maybe Zoran still, but it'd be much tighter. So just something to think about and just kind of some points that I wanted to make. All in all, I think he did great, and I'm excited to see what happens. So thanks everyone for hopping on, and I look forward to seeing everyone in the next episode.